Sarah Mitchell stood in the middle of her small apartment, staring at the keys dangling from her boyfriend's fingers. The silver Toyota Camry parked outside her window gleamed under the afternoon sun, its pristine paint job reflecting the clouds above. David held the keys out to her with a nervous smile, his hands slightly trembling with what she assumed was excitement. "It's yours," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I bought it for you." Sarah's heart should have soared. For months she had been taking 3 buses to get to her job at the local hospital where she worked as a nurse. The daily commute took 2 hours each way, leaving her exhausted before she even started her 12-hour shifts. She had mentioned needing a car countless times, especially during the harsh winter months when waiting for buses in the snow felt unbearable. But something felt wrong. David worked at a small accounting firm, making barely enough to cover his own rent and student loans. They had been dating for 8 months, and while their relationship was comfortable, it lacked the deep connection she had always hoped for in a partner. He was kind, reliable, and always tried to make her happy. But there was something distant about him, as if he was holding back parts of himself. "David, I can't accept this," Sarah said, gently pushing his hand away. "You can't afford a car like this. What did you do, take out a loan you can't handle?" David's face fell, and he looked genuinely hurt by her rejection. "I've been saving up. I wanted to surprise you. I know how hard it's been for you getting to work every day." Sarah studied his face carefully. She had become good at reading people during her years in nursing, learning to spot when patients weren't telling her the full truth about their pain or symptoms. The same instinct was kicking in now. David was lying, or at least not telling her everything. "Where did you get the money?" she asked directly, crossing her arms. "Last week you borrowed $40 from me for groceries. Now you're buying me a $15,000 car?" The silence that followed was deafening. David shifted his weight from foot to foot, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. Finally, he sat down heavily on her worn couch, the keys still clutched in his fist. "My grandmother," he said finally. "She left me some money when she passed away last month. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to think I was suddenly rich or anything. It wasn't that much, but enough for this." Sarah felt a pang of sympathy. David had mentioned his grandmother's death briefly, but he hadn't seemed particularly affected by it. She had assumed they weren't close. Now she wondered if he had been grieving quietly, the way some people do when they don't want to burden others with their pain. Still, something nagged at her. "Why didn't you tell me about the inheritance? We've been together for months. That seems like something you'd share with your girlfriend." David looked up at her with wounded eyes. "Because I knew you'd react exactly like this. You'd question everything, analyze every detail. I just wanted to do something nice for you without it turning into an interrogation." His words stung because they held a grain of truth. Sarah did have a tendency to overthink things, to look for problems where none might exist. It was a trait that served her well in her profession, but sometimes created friction in her personal relationships. Her ex-boyfriend had accused her of being too suspicious, too quick to assume the worst in people. She sat down beside David on the couch, close enough to see the genuine hurt in his expression. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sound ungrateful. It's just such a big gift and we haven't even talked about where our relationship is going. Accepting something like this feels like a huge step." David reached for her hand, his fingers warm and slightly damp with nervousness. "Maybe that's exactly why I bought it. Maybe it is a big step. Maybe I want us to take that step together." The conversation was heading into territory that made Sarah uncomfortable. She cared about David, but she wasn't in love with him. She had been in love before, with her college boyfriend Marcus, and knew the difference between genuine passion and comfortable companionship. With Marcus, every moment had felt electric. Every conversation had sparked new discoveries about each other. With David, things felt safe but predictable. "David, we need to talk about this properly. Not just about the car, but about us, about what you want from this relationship." He squeezed her hand tighter. "I want everything with you, Sarah. I want us to move in together. Maybe get engaged next year. I want to build a life together." The words hit her like cold water. Engaged? They had never discussed marriage, never talked about their long-term goals or whether they were compatible in the ways that mattered for a lifetime partnership. Sarah realized with growing clarity that David had been planning a future she hadn't agreed to be part of. "I need time to think," she said gently, pulling her hand away. "About the car, about us, about everything. This is all happening too fast." David's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked like a lost child. "The car is just a car, Sarah. I'm not trying to buy your love or trap you into anything. I just thought it would make your life easier." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the Toyota that now felt more like a burden than a gift. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the parking lot. She thought about her colleague Jennifer, who had recently gone through a messy breakup with a man who had showered her with expensive gifts while cheating on her with his ex-wife. Jennifer had said the gifts were his way of managing his guilt, of keeping her happy enough not to ask difficult questions. Was David hiding something too? Or was he simply a man who had come into some money and wanted to spoil his girlfriend? Sarah wished she could trust her instincts, but her past experiences had taught her that sometimes her suspicions were unfounded, causing her to sabotage good relationships out of fear. She turned back to David, who was still sitting on the couch looking dejected. "Let's compromise. Keep the car for now, but let me think about everything else. Can you give me a week?" David nodded slowly, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. "Of course. But Sarah, I hope you'll really consider what I said about us. I meant every word." After he left, taking the keys with him, Sarah sat alone in her apartment as darkness fell outside. She had a week to figure out whether she was being paranoid or protecting herself from something her heart already knew was wrong. The next morning, Sarah found herself unable to concentrate during her shift at the hospital. Every time she tried to focus on her patients, her mind wandered back to David's strange behavior and the car she had refused. During her lunch break, she called her best friend Maria, who worked as a social worker across town. "He bought you a car and you turned it down?" Maria's voice crackled through the phone with disbelief. "Girl, what's wrong with you? Do you know how many women would kill for a boyfriend who pays attention to their needs like that?" Sarah stirred her coffee absently, watching the cream swirl into patterns. "It's not that simple, Mar. Something feels off about the whole thing. He's been acting weird lately, secretive. And the money story doesn't add up." "Maybe you're overthinking this," Maria suggested. "Remember what happened with James? You convinced yourself he was cheating because he started working late, and it turned out he was planning your surprise birthday party." The memory made Sarah wince. James had been her boyfriend 2 years ago, and her suspicious nature had nearly destroyed their relationship over a misunderstanding. She had learned to second-guess her instincts after that, but now she wondered if she had overcorrected in the other direction. "This is different," Sarah insisted. "David borrowed money from me last week for groceries, Maria. How does someone go from borrowing $40 to buying a $15,000 car in 7 days? Maybe he was too proud to tell you about the inheritance right away. Men can be weird about money, especially when they're trying to seem like they have their life together." After hanging up, Sarah decided to do what she did best: research. She spent the rest of her lunch break on her phone, looking up David's grandmother's obituary. She found it easily enough in the local newspaper's online archives. Eleanor Morrison, aged 87, passed away peacefully surrounded by family. The obituary mentioned several grandchildren, including David Morrison of downtown Portland. Sarah felt a wave of guilt wash over her. The obituary was real, which meant David's story could be true. Maybe she really was being paranoid, letting her past experiences poison a potentially good relationship. She decided to give David the benefit of the doubt and focus on the more important question: did she want a future with him? That evening, Sarah took her usual bus route home, using the commute time to think about her relationship. David was kind, stable, and clearly cared about her. He had never given her reason to doubt his faithfulness or his character before this incident. Maybe Maria was right. Maybe she was sabotaging something good because she was afraid of commitment. When she arrived home, She found David waiting outside her apartment building with takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant. He looked nervous but hopeful, holding up the bag of food like a peace offering. "I thought we could have dinner and talk," he said. "No pressure about the car or anything else. I just want to spend time with you." Over pad thai and spring rolls, they talked about everything except the elephant in the room. David told her about his week at work, a difficult client who couldn't get their books to balance. Sarah shared stories from the hospital, including a particularly touching moment. When she had helped calm a scared child before surgery, the conversation felt natural and comfortable, reminding her of why she had started dating David in the first place. It wasn't until they were finishing their meal that David brought up the car again. "I returned it," he said quietly. "Took it. Back to the dealer today." Sarah looked up from her food, surprised. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. I realized after I left yesterday that I was putting you in an impossible position. The car was supposed to be a gift to make your life easier, not a source of stress." David reached across the table to take her hand. "I should have talked to you first, asked what you needed instead of assuming I knew." His words touched something deep in Sarah's chest. This was the David she had fallen for. Thoughtful, considerate, willing to admit when he was wrong. "What did you do with the money?" "Put it back in savings. I'll probably use some of it to pay off my student loans, maybe save the rest for something we both decide on together." David paused, studying her face. "If there's still a together for us to decide on." Sarah felt the last of her suspicions melting away. "There is. I'm sorry I was so suspicious about everything. I have this terrible habit of looking for problems where none exist." David smiled for the first time all evening. "It's not terrible. It's one of the things that makes you such a good nurse. You pay attention to details other people miss." They spent the rest of the evening watching a movie on Sarah's laptop, David's arm around her shoulders as they shared her small couch. For the first time in days, Sarah felt relaxed and content. Maybe she had been wrong about David. Maybe her instincts had led her astray this time. But as David dozed beside her during the movie's credits, Sarah noticed his phone lighting up with text messages. The screen was angled away from her, but she could see that several different people were trying to reach him. When one call came through, David woke up immediately and declined it without looking at who was calling. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked. "Just work stuff," David mumbled, settling back against the couch. "I'll deal with it tomorrow." Sarah nodded, but something cold settled in her stomach. It was nearly 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. What kind of work emergency would generate multiple calls and texts at this hour? And why had David looked so tense when he saw the phone lighting up? She told herself to let it go, that she was falling back into old patterns of suspicion. But as they said goodnight and David headed home to his own apartment, Sarah found herself wide awake, staring at the ceiling, and wondering what kind of work David Morrison really did. The next morning, Sarah made a decision that would have horrified her rational mind if she had stopped to think about it. She called the accounting firm where David claimed to work and asked to speak with him, saying she was his girlfriend and had a quick question. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said politely, "but we don't have a David Morrison working here. Are you sure you have the right company?" Sarah's heart began to race. Maybe he goes by a different name? He's about 6 feet tall, brown hair, works in accounting. "I'm sorry, but that doesn't match any of our employees. We're a pretty small firm. Only 12 people total. I know everyone who works here." Sarah hung up the phone with shaking hands. David had been lying to her about his job. If he had lied about something as basic as where he worked, what else had he lied about? And if he wasn't working at an accounting firm, where was he going every day when he left her apartment in his business clothes? The inheritance story suddenly seemed much less believable. If David didn't work where he claimed to work, how could she trust anything he had told her about his grandmother or the money for the car? Sarah realized she might not know David Morrison at all. Sarah spent the rest of her shift at the hospital in a daze, mechanically going through the motions of checking on patients while her mind raced with questions about David's deception. Every time she tried to focus on her work, The receptionist's words echoed in her head. "We don't have a David Morrison working here." During her break, she sat in the hospital parking lot and tried to piece together what she knew about David's daily routine. He left his apartment every morning at 8:30, dressed in business casual clothes. He always carried a leather briefcase and complained about his commute downtown. He worked late some evenings and occasionally mentioned difficult clients or boring meetings. If he wasn't going to an accounting firm, where was he spending 40 hours a week? Sarah realized with growing alarm how little she actually knew about David's life outside their relationship. She had never been to his workplace, never met his coworkers, never even seen a pay stub or work ID. When she tried to think of concrete details he had shared about his job, she came up empty. His stories were always vague. Difficult client, boring meeting, end-of-month reports. Never names, never specific situations, never the kind of detailed complaints that people usually share about their work frustrations. She pulled out her phone and searched for David Morrison on social media. His profiles were sparse, with no employment information listed and very few photos. Most of his posts were shares of news articles or sports updates, nothing personal that might give her insight into his real life. She scrolled through his friends list, looking for anyone who might be a coworker or someone she could ask about his job, but none of the names were familiar. That evening, Sarah made an excuse about working late and followed David when he left his apartment the next morning. She felt ridiculous skulking around in her car like a private investigator, but she needed to know where he was really going every day. David drove downtown just as he always claimed, but instead of stopping at any office building, he pulled into the parking lot of a small casino on the outskirts of the business district. Sarah watched in disbelief as he walked through the entrance carrying his briefcase, greeting the security guard like an old friend. A casino. David was spending his days at a casino. Sarah sat in her car for over an hour, trying to process what she had discovered. Was David a professional gambler? Was that where the money for the car had come from, a winning streak? Or worse, was he addicted to gambling, lying to her about having a job while he lost money they didn't have? She thought about all the times David had seemed nervous or secretive. All the late-night phone calls he claimed were work-related. Maybe they were calls from loan sharks or other gamblers. Maybe the inheritance story was a complete fabrication to cover up gambling winnings or debts. When David emerged from the casino 6 hours later, Sarah followed him to a nearby diner where he met with 2 other men. Through the window, she could see them engaged in what looked like a serious conversation, occasionally glancing around as if checking to make sure they weren't being watched. One of the men handed David an envelope which he quickly tucked into his briefcase. Sarah's hands were shaking as she drove home. Everything about David's behavior suddenly made sense if he was involved in something illegal. The secretiveness, the sudden availability of cash, the lies about his job, it all pointed to activities that existed outside the normal world of employment and taxes. She called in sick to work the next day, something she rarely did, and spent hours researching the casino David had visited. It was a small independent establishment with a reputation for attracting serious players rather than casual tourists. Online reviews mentioned high-stakes poker games and a clientele of professional gamblers and local businessmen looking for discreet entertainment. Sarah also discovered that the casino had been investigated several times by local authorities for possible money laundering connections, though no charges had ever been filed. The more she read, the more convinced she became that David was involved in something far more serious than recreational gambling. That afternoon, she made a decision that terrified her. She drove back to the casino and asked to speak with a manager, claiming she was looking for information about her boyfriend who might be spending too much time there. The manager, a thin woman named Patricia with sharp eyes and an expensive suit, listened to Sarah's description of David with obvious recognition. "Honey, I can't discuss specific patrons with you," Patricia said carefully. "But I can tell you that if you're worried about someone's gambling habits, there are resources available to help." "Is he in trouble?" Sarah asked directly. "I mean, real trouble, not just losing money trouble." Patricia studied Sarah's face for a long moment. "What exactly has he told you about what he does for work?" He said he's an accountant. Patricia's expression grew concerned. Listen, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but you seem like a nice girl who's gotten in over her head. Your boyfriend isn't just a gambler. He's what we call a cleaner. He helps certain clients move money around in ways that make it hard for authorities to track. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. You mean money laundering? I mean, you should be very careful about accepting any gifts from this man, and you should probably think seriously about whether you want to be associated with him at all. Patricia handed Sarah a business card. If you ever need to talk to someone about what you've learned, call this number. It's for people who find themselves involved with individuals who work outside the law. Sarah stared at the card, which had the logo of the FBI field office. Patricia was telling her to contact federal authorities about David. The drive home felt surreal. David wasn't just lying about his job. He was involved in criminal activity. The money for the car hadn't come from a deceased grandmother or gambling winnings. It had come from helping criminals hide their illegal profits. Sarah thought about all the times David had been affectionate with her, all the conversations they had shared, all the future plans he had mentioned. Had any of it been real? Was she just a convenient cover story for him? A normal girlfriend who could help him appear legitimate? When she arrived home, she found David waiting outside her apartment with flowers and a worried expression. Your supervisor said you called, and sick. Are you feeling okay? His concern seemed genuine, which somehow made everything worse. Sarah took the flowers with numb fingers. I'm fine. Just needed a personal day. David studied her face carefully. You look upset about something. Did something happen? For a moment, Sarah considered confronting him directly, demanding the truth about his real job and the source of his money. But Patricia's warning echoed in her mind. She should be careful about being associated with David at all. If he was involved in money laundering, there might be dangerous people connected to his activities. I'm just tired, she said instead. This job can be emotionally draining sometimes. David reached out to touch her face gently. You work too hard. You deserve someone who can take care of you, make your life easier. The irony of his words wasn't lost on her. He was offering to make her life easier with money that came from criminal activity. Sarah realized she was standing at a crossroads that would define the rest of her life. She could pretend she didn't know what she knew and continue the relationship, possibly becoming complicit in David's activities. Or she could find a way to extract herself from the situation before it was too late. David, she said quietly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. His body tensed almost imperceptibly. Of course. What is it? Where does your money really come from? David's face went completely still at Sarah's question. For several long seconds, they stared at each other in the hallway outside her apartment, the flowers hanging forgotten in her hand. Sarah could see him calculating, deciding how much truth he could afford to tell her. What do you mean? He asked finally, his voice carefully neutral. I called your accounting firm yesterday. They don't have any David Morrison working there. They've never heard of you. Sarah's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. So I'll ask again. Where does your money come from? David closed his eyes and leaned back against the wall. When he opened them again, Sarah saw something she had never seen before. Genuine fear. How much do you know? He asked quietly. I know you spend your days at the River Rock Casino. I know you meet with people who hand you envelopes. I know the casino has been investigated for money laundering. Sarah unlocked her apartment door, gesturing for him to follow her inside. What I don't know is whether my boyfriend is a criminal. Once, inside, David sat heavily on her couch, his head in his hands. It's not what you think. I'm not some kind of mastermind or anything. I'm just a guy who got in over his head. Explain it to me, Sarah said, sitting across from him but keeping her distance. David looked up at her with haunted eyes. It started 3 years ago when I lost my real job at the accounting firm. I was behind on rent, behind on my student loans, and my credit was shot. I went to the casino one night planning to spend my last $100, figuring I had nothing left to lose. He paused, running his hands through his hair. I won big that night. Not life-changing money, but enough to catch up on my bills. So I went back the next week, and I won again. I started thinking I was some kind of gambling genius. But you weren't, Sarah said. No, I wasn't. Within 2 months, I had lost everything I had won plus everything else I could get my hands on. I borrowed money from friends, maxed out credit cards, even took a payday loan. I was desperate. David stood up and walked to her window, staring out at the parking lot where the Toyota had been just days before. That's when I met Vincent. He's one of the regular high-stakes players at the casino. He saw how deep I was in trouble and offered me a way out. Money laundering, Sarah said. He called it financial consulting. All I had to do was take money from his associates and run it through various accounts, make it look like legitimate business transactions. He said it was mostly tax avoidance, rich people trying to hide assets from divorce lawyers or business partners. Sarah felt sick. But you knew it was illegal. I told myself it wasn't that bad. Nobody was getting hurt. I wasn't stealing from regular people, just helping rich guys move their own money around. David turned back to face her. Vincent paid me well, and for the first time in years, I could breathe again. I could pay my debts, rent a decent apartment, take you on nice dates. The car, Sarah said, understanding dawning. Vincent paid you enough to buy the car. It was a bonus for handling a particularly complicated transaction. Vincent said I was one of his best workers, completely reliable and discreet. The car was supposed to be my reward for a job well done. Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing to the other side of the room. Do you realize what you've done, what you've made me part of by association? You're not part of anything, David said quickly. I made sure to keep you completely separate from my work. You're clean, Sarah. No matter what happens to me, you're safe. Safe? Sarah's voice rose. I'm dating a money launderer. I almost accepted a car bought with criminal money. How is that safe? David reached for her, but she stepped back. Sarah, please. I know how this looks, but I'm trying to get out. That's what those meetings have been about lately. I've been telling Vincent I want to stop, that I want to go legitimate again, and he's just letting you walk away? The silence that followed answered her question more clearly than words could have. David's face had gone pale, and she could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature in her apartment. It's complicated, he said finally. How complicated? Vincent doesn't usually let people just quit. He says I know too, much about his operation, about his clients. He's worried I might become a liability. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What does that mean exactly? It means he's been making suggestions about ways I could prove my continued loyalty. Bigger jobs, more permanent involvement in his organization? David sat back down looking defeated. The car was supposed to be an incentive for me to stay. He told me I should settle down, get comfortable, stop thinking about leaving. He knows about me. He knows I have a girlfriend. He's been encouraging me to make things more serious between us, maybe even get married. He thinks having a wife would make me more stable, less likely to do anything stupid. Sarah realized with horror that her relationship with David had been part of Vincent's plan all along. That's why you've been talking about engagement, about our future together. Not because you love me, but because your criminal boss thinks it would be good for business. No. David stood up again, reaching for her desperately. Sarah, that's not true. I do love you. Everything I said about wanting a future together, that's all real. Vincent's suggestions just gave me the courage to say what I was already feeling. Sarah backed away from him, her mind reeling. How could she trust anything he said now? How could she believe his feelings were genuine when his entire life was built on lies and criminal activity? I need you to leave, she said quietly. Sarah, please let me explain everything. Let me show you that I'm trying to make this right. By doing what? Taking on bigger jobs for Vincent, getting in even deeper? Sarah shook her head. You said yourself that he doesn't let people just quit. What makes you think you can get out of this? David was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. There might be a way, but it would be dangerous, and I would need help. Despite herself, Sarah found herself asking, What kind of help? The kind that involves talking to federal agents. The kind that could put Vincent and his associates in prison, but could also get me killed if they found out. Sarah stared at him, remembering Patricia's business card still tucked in her purse. The FBI contact information suddenly seemed less like an abstract possibility and more like an immediate necessity. You're talking about becoming an informant, she said. I'm talking about doing the right thing, finally. But Sarah, if I do this, if I work with the authorities to bring down Vincent's operation, there's no going back. My life as I know it would be over. I might have to go into witness protection, disappear completely. Sarah felt tears she hadn't realized she was crying running down her cheeks. And you want me to disappear with you? I want you to have the choice. If you can forgive me for all the lies, if you can see past what I've done to who I'm trying to become, then yes. I want you to come with me wherever I end up. The apartment fell silent, except for the sound of traffic outside. Sarah looked at David, this man she thought she knew, and tried to reconcile the criminal he had admitted to being with the gentle person who had brought her flowers and worried about her bus commute. I need time to think, she said finally. David nodded, though she could see the desperation in his eyes. How much time? I don't know. This is my life you're asking me to throw away, David. My career, my friends, my family. Everything. As David left her apartment for what might be the last time, Sarah realized that her simple decision about accepting a car had led her to the most complicated choice of her life. Sarah spent that night staring at Patricia's business card, turning it over in her hands until the edges were worn soft. Every time she reached for her phone to dial the FBI number, she stopped herself, wondering if she was about to destroy David's life or save it. By morning, she had made a decision that surprised even her. She called in sick to work again and drove to the address on the business card. The FBI field office was a nondescript building downtown, with security checkpoints and bulletproof glass that made Sarah feel like she was entering another world entirely. When she asked to speak with someone about a money laundering operation, she was quickly escorted to a small conference room where 2 agents were waiting for her. Agent Rebecca Chen was a woman about Sarah's age with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her partner, Agent Marcus Torres, was older and had the weathered look of someone who had seen too much criminal behavior to be surprised by anything. They listened without interruption as Sarah told them everything she had learned about David's activities. Ms. Mitchell, Agent Chen said when Sarah finished her story, you should know that your boyfriend is involved in a much larger operation than he probably realizes. We've been investigating Vincent Torino's network for 2 years. Vincent Torino? Sarah repeated the name, realizing she had never heard David mention Vincent's last name. He runs one of the most sophisticated money laundering operations on the West Coast, Agent Torres explained. We estimate he's processed over $50 million in illegal funds through his network in the past 3 years. Your boyfriend is one of several cleaners who handle the day-to-day financial transactions. Sarah felt dizzy. $50 million. David had made it sound like he was helping a few rich people hide money from their ex-wives, not processing vast sums of criminal cash. The problem is, Agent Chen continued, we've never been able to get anyone close enough to Torino to gather evidence. His inner circle is small and extremely loyal. Most of them have worked for him for years and have too much to lose by talking to us. But David is different, Sarah said, understanding where this was heading. He wants out. Potentially, but wanting out and being willing to risk his life to help us build a case are 2 very different things. Agent Torres leaned forward. Has he mentioned being willing to wear a wire or document transactions? Sarah shook her head. We only talked about it briefly. But he seemed serious about doing the right thing. The agents exchanged glances. Ms. Mitchell, we need to be very clear with you about something. If David agrees to cooperate with us, he will be in significant physical danger. Vincent Torino has a reputation for dealing harshly with people who betray him. We've had 3 potential informants in similar situations over the past 2 years, and all of them backed out when they realized what they were risking. What happened to them? One moved out of state and changed his identity on his own. Another is serving 5 years in federal prison for money laundering because he chose not to cooperate with our investigation. The third, Agent Chen paused. The third was found dead in his apartment 3 days after he contacted us. We could never prove Vincent was responsible, but the timing was suspicious. Sarah felt cold dread settling in her stomach. So you're saying David could end up dead if he tries to help you? We're saying that's a real possibility, yes. But we're also saying that if he doesn't help us, he'll likely end up in federal prison when we eventually bring down Vincent's network, and that will happen. It's just a question of how long it takes and how many people get caught up in it. Agent Torres pulled out a thick file and spread some photographs across the table. Sarah recognized several faces from the casino, including the men she had seen David meeting with at the diner. These. When David arrived at Sarah's apartment that evening, she barely recognized him. His usual careful composure had cracked completely. His hands were shaking, his shirt was wrinkled, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. Most disturbing of all were the dark bruises visible on his neck, partially hidden by his collar. "David, what happened to you?" Sarah reached out to touch the bruises, but he flinched away. "Vincent's getting impatient with my hesitation about taking on bigger responsibilities," David said, slumping onto her couch. "Today he had 2 of his guys give me a preview of what happens to people who disappoint him." Sarah felt sick. "They hurt you?" This was just a warning. They made it very clear that next time would be much worse. David looked up at her with desperate eyes. "Sarah, I have to make a decision tonight. Vincent wants me to handle a major transaction tomorrow, something that would make me a key player in his organization permanently. If I say no, I don't think I'll live to see the weekend." Sarah sat down across from him, her heart pounding. The timing felt like fate intervening. What if there was a third option? "What do you mean?" Sarah pulled out Agent Chen's business card, setting it on the coffee table between them. "I went to see the FBI today. They've been investigating Vincent for 2 years. They need someone on the inside to help them build a case." David stared at the card like it might explode. "Sarah, you can't be serious. If Vincent found out I was working with federal agents, he wouldn't just kill me. He'd make it slow and painful to send a message to anyone else who might think about betraying him. And if you don't help them, how long before you end up in federal prison anyway? The FBI is going to bring down Vincent's operation eventually. The only question is whether you'll be arrested as part of his network or protected as someone who helped stop it." David stood up and walked to her window, the same spot where he had stood just days earlier when he first confessed to money laundering. "What did they tell you? What would they want me to do?" "Document transactions, record conversations, gather evidence about where the money comes from and where it goes. They said they'd train you and provide equipment to keep you as safe as possible." "As safe as possible," David repeated bitterly. "That's not very reassuring." Sarah joined him at the window. "David, they showed me photographs of Vincent's associates. Drug dealers, human traffickers, arms dealers. The money you've been laundering comes from people who destroy lives for profit. How can you keep being part of that? You think I don't know that?" David's voice was sharp with frustration and guilt. "You think I don't lie awake at night wondering how many people got hurt to generate the money I process? But knowing it's wrong and being able to safely stop doing it are 2 different things. The FBI agent said Vincent is planning something big in the next few weeks. What if this major transaction he wants you to handle tomorrow is part of that?" David was quiet for a long moment. "It is. He's bringing in a massive shipment from his contacts in Mexico. Drugs, weapons, probably people too. The transaction I'm supposed to handle is the payment for the whole operation, over $10 million. Sarah felt the magnitude of the situation settling around them like a weight. $10 million in criminal proceeds. How many lives would be destroyed by whatever Vincent was importing? How many families would be torn apart by the drugs? How many victims would be trafficked? How many communities would suffer from the weapons? David, you have to help them stop this. Even if it gets me killed?" Sarah took his hands, feeling how cold they were despite the warm evening. "Even if it's dangerous. Because the alternative is being complicit in something that will hurt thousands of people." David pulled his hands away and began pacing her small living room. "You don't understand what you're asking. Vincent doesn't just kill informants. He destroys their families too. Anyone he thinks might have known about the betrayal becomes a target. The implication hits Sarah like a physical blow. You mean me? I mean both of us. If I work with the FBI and Vincent finds out, he'll assume you knew about it. He'll come after you to send a message even if you had nothing to do with my decision. Sarah realized that her choice had already been made for her the moment she walked into the FBI office that morning. Whether David cooperated or not, she was now part of Vincent's world by association. The only question was whether she would be a victim of his criminal enterprise or someone who helped bring it down. Then we do this together, she said quietly. David stopped pacing and stared at her. Sarah, no, I won't let you risk your life for my mistakes. It's not just about your mistakes anymore. I know about Vincent's operation now. I've talked to federal agents. I'm already involved whether we want me to be or not. Sarah picked up her phone. I'm calling Agent Chen. Wait. David sat down heavily, his head in his hands. If we do this, if I agree to work with them, everything changes. Our entire lives disappear. We'd have to go into witness protection, start over somewhere, else with new identities. I know. You'd lose your career, your friends, your family. Everything you've worked for. Sarah thought about her job at the hospital, about the patients who depended on her skills and compassion. She thought about Maria, about her parents, about her sister's upcoming wedding that she would miss. Then she thought about the $10 million Vincent was about to use to import misery and destruction. Some things are more important than what I want for myself, she said. David looked up at her with an expression of wonder and terror. You're really willing to throw away your entire life to help me do the right thing? I'm willing to throw away my life as I know it to help stop something terrible from happening to people I'll never meet. Sarah sat down beside him. David, when I was in nursing school, they taught us about triage, how to decide who to help first when there are multiple people in crisis. You help the people who have the best chance of survival and who can contribute the most good if they live. Right now, you're someone who can save a lot of people by making one brave choice. David was quiet for several minutes, and Sarah could see him weighing the impossible decision. Finally, he reached for her phone. Call them. Agent Chen answered on the second ring despite the late hour. Ms. Mitchell, has something happened? David wants to cooperate, Sarah said, putting the phone on speaker. But Vincent is rushing the timeline. There's a major transaction scheduled for tomorrow that involves over $10 million. We'll be right there, Agent Chen said without hesitation. Within an hour, Sarah's small apartment had been transformed into a makeshift FBI command center. Agent Chen and Agent Torres had arrived with recording equipment, legal documents, and a detailed plan for how David could document the next day's transaction without raising Vincent's suspicions. The wire will be nearly invisible, Agent Torres explained, showing David a device no larger than a button. But you'll need to get Vincent talking about the source of the money and what it's being used for. What if he suspects something? David asked. Then you abort immediately and get to a public place, Agent Chen said. We'll have surveillance teams in position, but your safety is the priority. As the agents prepared their equipment and reviewed their strategy, Sarah found herself thinking about the car David had tried to give her just a week earlier. If she had accepted it, would any of this have happened? Would she have discovered David's real job? Would she be sitting here now preparing to help bring down a criminal network? Ms. Mitchell, Agent Chen said, interrupting her thoughts. We need to discuss your role in this operation. My role? David will be wearing a wire tomorrow. But we also need someone Vincent trusts to verify that David is acting normally. He's mentioned you to Vincent's associates several times. If you were to accompany him tomorrow, it would appear more natural. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. You want me to wear a wire too? We want you to be David's backup. If something goes wrong, you'll be our eyes and ears in the room. David stood up abruptly. Absolutely not. I won't let Sarah get that close to Vincent. David, Sarah said quietly. If this is the only way to make sure the operation succeeds, then I'll do it. Sarah, These people have killed federal informants before, and they'll keep killing people if we don't stop them. Sarah looked around, the room at the agents who were risking their careers to build this case, at David who was risking his life to do the right thing. I'm already in this deeper than I ever planned to be. Let's finish it. Agent Chen nodded approvingly. We'll fit you both with recording devices and communication equipment. Tomorrow you'll attend the transaction as David's girlfriend, there, to provide moral support while he handles Vincent's business. As the agents finished their preparations and left Sarah's apartment in the early hours of the morning, Sarah and David sat together on her couch, holding each other in the darkness. Neither of them spoke about the very real possibility that they might not survive the next 24 hours. Do you regret it? David asked finally. Getting involved in all of this? Sarah thought about the question seriously. A week ago, her biggest worry had been her bus commute to work. Now she was about to risk her life to help the FBI bring down a money laundering operation that financed human trafficking and drug distribution. Ask me again tomorrow night, she said, if we're both still alive to talk about it.